You're listening to the Society Show with Christian Patterson. I'm here with political operative Jacob Wohl. Jacob, welcome to the show.
Hey, it's great to be here, Christian. I'll tell you what, it's a busy week, but I always love doing podcasts because you never know what you're going to get.
Yeah, perfect. So, when I introduced you, I identified you as a political operative. Is that how you would identify yourself?
I would. I first got into politics in the punditry realm. I was hosting a number of podcasts and tweeting a whole lot and writing many articles on my website, firstoffendedamerica.com, and then the Washington Reporter. And then I sort of got out of punditry for about a year and a half and worked really in the operative realm with Jack Berkman and Project 1599, which I'm the co-founder of. And now I've sort of dabbled back into punditry with my new show, Man Up with Jacob Wohl, on censored.tv.
Perfect. So, what was that? You said project and then some numbers. What is that?
Project 1599 is the project that I started with Jack Berkman. It's 100% internally self-funded. And what we decided to do was that there needed to be an independent project that was set up for the purpose of vetting the 2020 presidential candidates. One thing that was clear to us is that you can't rely on the media to do the vetting. Particularly when you have hyper-partisan media out there that are only interested in making sure that establishment Democrats, not just Democrats, but establishment Democrats, win elections. So we set up this project, and the idea was the internet's a wild place. If you watched the 2016 presidential election, you know this thing. If you watched the internet, you would think that Hillary in 2016 had every disease under the sun, from Parkinson's to seizures to cancer and everything else. Maybe she was even a lizard. So what we did was we set up this project to sort through the internet rumors and get to the truth. And then if we were able to get to the truth, if the candidates were cooperative, we would give them the Berkman-Wohl Project 1599 seal of approval, which we ended up doing with Bernie Sanders and with Joe Sestak, who's a little-known candidate, and also John Delaney. All three of those candidates came to Project 1599. They went through our vetting. And it doesn't mean we agree with their politics, but we were able to say definitively that the internet rumors about them that were salacious were not, in fact, true.
Okay, so was this the same organization where you did, for example, the thing you've done that I personally enjoyed the most is when you had that guy say that he was a prostitute and accuse Elizabeth Warren of being a dominatrix. And
is Elizabeth Warren a dom, a sub, or like a switch?
She's very she's more of a dominatrix, if you understand.
The bit that always stays with me is the lime green strap-on dildo.
And Senator Warren engaged in lesbian sex with my friend from high school, using a lime green strap-on dildo. As I can remember. I'm sorry. I'm sorry.
What's funny?
So is that connected to the same project? And
That's right. That's right.
And how do you feel about that press conference now?
Well, I think that it was one of our great hits. I mean, it was talked about for months. It was on Saturday Night Live. It was certainly an immortalized event. And really, I think when you look back at the 2020 Democratic primary, one thing was clear from the very beginning. It was going to be a fake primary. The candidates were not really going to seriously attack one another. Maybe there'd be a jab here, a jab there, but nothing serious. And what they were going to do was engage in a sort of fake debate, and then at the end of it, they were going to crown Joe Biden. That much was clear. So in the wake of what would have been a very boring and a very dry primary season, I think that Project 1599 with Jack Berkman and I created some of the most memorable moments.
Yeah, I actually tend to agree. So I have a question about that. So the way I kind of interpret the primary process is the Democratic Party didn't really care who the nominee was. They had preferences, but they just didn't want it to be Bernie. And then once the field was so crowded, they were like, oh, well, we have to settle for Joe. But say if Elizabeth Warren, maybe, but maybe Pete Buttigieg, Amy Klobuchar, someone like that, really started taking off, they would have latched on to them. So do you think they always had Joe Biden in mind, or they fell into that strategy?
Well, I think you're right about Bernie, number one, and it's very simple. I mean, and I talk to establishment Democrats who will say this openly. They don't say this on television, but they'll say this in private conversations. And the reality is that the Democrat Party, the DNC, is financed mostly by Wall Street and in some part by Silicon Valley. And these companies have made one thing very clear. If you allow Bernie to be the nominee, we will pull our money. And not only will we pull our money, so this is the money that pays the janitor at the DNC headquarters. This is money that finances the entire operation. Not only will they pull the money, but they'll give it, in fact, to the Republicans. So that was one thing. And then the other factor that comes into play is that the fact that Bernie Sanders is not a Democrat. He's, of course, an independent. He's never run as a Democrat. So for those two reasons, they were never going to allow Bernie to be the Democratic nominee, although he tried and he ran a valiant campaign. I mean, he raised more money than anyone. I mean, he raised more money than everybody else combined. Ran a hell of a campaign. He had total name ID. I think probably could have done a third party run if he wanted to, and done it very successfully, because he was the only candidate that really had any ideas, that had any original ideas, that had a plan for the future. All of the other candidates was basically Trump is bad, vote for me. Now, your hypothesis about they didn't really care, I think that's more or less correct, and maybe both things can be true. Maybe a large contingent of the party didn't really care, and some did. But many of these candidates, unfortunately, just didn't have the name ID. That's something that Bernie and Joe possess on a level that none of the other candidates did. Certainly a candidate like Pete Buttigieg, who got a lot of play, but frankly, if you ask people today who he is, they probably don't remember. And if you ask them before the primary, they certainly didn't know who he was. So it was a really a boring primary, a boring bunch of debates. There was a couple of moments that were interesting and fun, but for the most part, very dry. And I think that we gave the primary some character, some color, some flavor. And I think everybody's better for it. All of the candidates.
Yeah, I definitely agree. Although we did end up stuck with Joe Biden, which, I mean, you're a Republican, or do you consider yourself a Republican or just conservative? Or
I do.
Okay.
I consider myself a Republican, and I don't shy away from it. Now, the thing with Joe is there's two areas. Project 1599 is ongoing, and we've invited Joe to come to Project 1599. Obviously within the auspices of whatever he feels like he needs to be safe, Secret Service detail, mask, distancing, whatever. But there's two areas that we want to examine when it comes to Joe Biden. The first area is his health and his mental well-being. We have offered to pay for an independent physician to come in. He can pay for it. We can pay for it. Whoever wants to pay for it, but it's got to be somebody who's independent, who's never worked with him before, to both examine him physically and in terms of his cognition. Because one thing that's clear to a lot of people, it's certainly clear to me, is that there has been a cognitive decline. If you look at Joe Biden in 2008 debating Sarah Palin, or in 2012 debating Paul Ryan, he was sharp. I mean, he was sharp as a whip, and he really was fast and quick on his feet and well-spoken and had his lines. Now he struggles to make it through a basic sentence, a basic interview. And it's not that this is making fun of him or anything like that. It's only natural. I mean, we all have grandparents and older members of our family, and certainly between the age of 67 and 78, a lot of them certainly slow down. So it's something that happens. It's not that it reflects poorly on his character or anything. But then the other area, of course, is this allegation by his former staffer, Tara Reade. And as allegations go, this allegation, you have basically three standards, as I see it. You have the criminal court standard, which is beyond a reasonable doubt. This allegation does not stand up to that standard. You have the civil court allegation, which is a preponderance of the evidence, or 50.1%. If it's more likely than not, that it's true, then it's true. I don't even believe that the Tara Reade allegation stands up to that standard. And then there's a third standard, which is the Me Too standard. And as I see it, the Me Too standard is sort of not 50.1%, but sort of 25.1%. Or if there's a 1 in 4 chance it's true, the person must be castigated and canceled and pushed out of public life. And the Tara Reade allegation certainly stands up to the Me Too standard, the standard that has led to Matt Lauer and Bill O'Reilly and Charlie Rose and so many beloved public figures being pushed out of public life. So those are the two areas we'd like to look at with Joe. We're welcoming him to come, and we'll pay for a polygrapher to come in and administer a polygraph. But his campaign so far has declined.
Yeah, there's an element about the Tara Reade allegations that, I mean, I think it's a huge issue, not really for Joe Biden, because I think, well, it might be, but I think a lot of people who would vote for him will anyway, and a lot of people who won't vote for him. But there is kind of like the Democrats showed their ass too much, because it really undermines any further allegations. Like, I would never, if I was in a similar situation, say I was sexually assaulted, I would never ever want to come out about that after the way they've kind of made all these really disgusting innuendos about Tara Reade. I mean, personally, I feel like I don't know about courts, but her allegations definitely have a lot of evidence to them that, and by Democrats ignoring that, they're completely throwing away that credibility that they were kind of trying to build up.
I agree. And, you know, during the course of Project 1599, we saw previews of what would end up happening, of course, to Tara Reade. For instance, when the Pete Buttigieg accuser came forward and claimed, and very serious accusation, claimed that he was involved in a date rape situation with Pete Buttigieg, victimized in that sense, and he was on camera at the Mayflower and signed a sworn affidavit under penalty of perjury. Immediately, I mean, I'm telling you, within a half hour of the allegation being out there on Twitter, they had found out exactly who this guy was. I mean, there's no any use his real name, and of course, I mean, okay, he's out there now, and they were calling every person he ever knew, his mother, his father, his uncle, his brother, even people he didn't know, but maybe he went to elementary school with. And they were harassing these people, calling them hundreds of times over and over and over again. And I was sitting there as his father got on the phone with him and, using language that I won't repeat, basically said, "You need to pull this back. I don't care if it's true. Say you were set up. Say it's not true. Say you were kidnapped by these guys. I don't care, but pull it back, because your mother and I are going to lose our jobs if you don't." And I saw this. And this is, of course, what's happening to Tara Reade. So if you bring an allegation forth against a Republican, you will be celebrated, you will be immortalized, you will be given speaking gigs, you will be given book deals. No matter how much your story begs credulity and you're afraid of flying or whatever else, you will be believed. And if you bring forth a story against a Democrat, you will be ostracized. That's what we've seen, and it's holding true with the Tara Reade allegation.
Yeah, so to detour a little bit, so I want to go back to Project 1599. So I read on your website that you're the chairman and president of the Arlington Institute Group. What is that, and is it connected to Project 1599 in any way?
It is. It is an outside organization, but it's a sister organization that conducts some of the research functions and some of the public relations functions that are not necessarily, they don't necessarily need to be held under the same roof, or it may carry out operations which, for instance, are not brought forward to the public under the guise of Project 1599. So everything that Project 1599 does is public, whereas with the Arlington Institute Group, an investigation may take place, and it may turn out that we feel it's better for that investigation, whatever our findings are, to be passed off to Project Veritas or to some other organization, and sometimes that happens. So
Yeah.
it's an adjacent organization.
Okay, and so I saw online that so it's called the Arlington Institute Group. I also found another group called the Arlington Institute without the word group. That's a nonprofit think tank. Are these completely unrelated?
Completely unrelated, yeah.
Okay,
Mm-hmm.
and again, going off of that, kind of elaborating on what you said, on your website it says that the Arlington Institute Group specializes in fifth generation political warfare, and the way I understand that is basically like money laundering, propaganda, kind of information warfare, dark money. But how do you understand fifth generational political warfare in this context?
Well, first of all, everything is well within both the letter of the law and the spirit of the law, and we always seek the best, most competent legal counsel when it comes to before we do anything, well before we do anything. But your understanding as to dark money, as to people having their interests in politics that they don't want necessarily out there, certainly that is something that I welcome, something that I think is necessary in politics. I mean, when you have a situation where if you are a rich individual and you work at Google and you decide that you're going to give a maximum donation to the Trump campaign, you're not going to be working at Google very long. They'll find a way to roust you and get you out of Google. So these people who want to have some influence, who want to put their money, which is their speech, to work, they will find other ways to do it. And maybe that means donating to a shadowy think tank that no one knows too much about, but is very active in the political scene. Or maybe it means donating as much as they possibly can to a super PAC, which has objectives that are not totally clear, but they know, and everyone that needs to know knows. So dark money is something that has evolved out of necessity, more so than any other reason.
So it's a way of like washing the cash before it goes elsewhere, basically?
No, not at all. Not at all. It's a way of exercising your political will in a way which is, again, legal, but not as public as, let's say, making a donation to a candidate's re-election, campaign.
Okay, so it's not like someone gives you money and then you disguise it in other transactions and then put it somewhere else.
That would be...
They're giving you the money in order to, as like a proxy to giving to Trump or something like that.
Sure. Just like in terms of the objectives of, just as an alternative, right? But of course, straw man donations, those sort of things, are illegal. You can't do that, and I would never welcome that or participate in it. But certainly, people want to get to the same point B, they have the same objective in mind, and so there's a vast number of groups that help them achieve that.
All right, and so I guess what's your goal with the political activities you do? Like, what would your ideal impact be on politics?
Well, people say that we are putting the nail in the coffin of democracy as we know it. And that's okay. I think the country's become far too democratic. I'd like to see us go back to a country where there are no Senate elections, where the state legislators, in fact, appoint senators. I'd love to go back to a world like that. It's far too easy to vote today with mail-in voting and with absentee ballots and with ballot harvesting. I'd like to see it be made a lot tougher to vote. I'd like to see access to voting, as it were, restricted more. Because what we know is that all of these things that come under these very, very pleasant-sounding auspices like voter access are nothing more than, in fact, democratic election rigging efforts. That's what they are. Okay. So I'd like to see them shut down and stifled wherever possible.
So for how maybe about 50% of the country votes right now, you want even less people to vote than that, right?
That's right, because the people who remain will be the people who you want to vote if you're a Republican. And make no mistake, I'm a Republican, I'm a conservative, I'm a partisan. I'm not a journalist. I don't pretend to be non-political. I don't pretend to be apolitical. I am a Republican operative. And so my interests are the interests of the Republican Party. And whatever makes the Republican Party more likely to succeed within, again, the realm of what is ethical and what is legal, I'm willing to assist.
Yeah, I can respect that because I feel like most Republicans take a stance that when they try to, say, suppress votes or do something around the margins of voting to restrict it, they act like they're actually acting more democratically when that's just clearly the marketing that they impose on that. Would you agree?
I would agree. I would say that it's spin. And again, of course, it's legal. I mean, going down to some backwater court in Alabama and suing to have people taken off the rolls, and the judge issues a legal court order, that's all legal, and people can appeal it if they don't like it. But I support it, and I've had the privilege of meeting and getting to know many of the operatives that carry these sort of things out, and it's fascinating work.
So where do you see politics in the future? Like in 10, 20, 30 years? Where do you think things are going?
Well, I had a quote, of course, in a USA Today interview that was taken out of context, in which I said sort of, you need to stop thinking about information and disinformation. Anymore, there will only be information. There will only be zeros and ones. And what matters is not whether that information is true, but what matters is how far it spreads and how many people believe it. And if it spreads far enough and enough people believe it, whether it's true or not is a moot point. And in fact, that's what we're seeing. I predict that this election, that this 2020 general presidential election, will become known as the election of the deep fake. This will be the first election in which you cannot believe what you see. You cannot believe what you hear. This week, there was a tape that came out of Joe Biden talking to the Ukrainian prime minister at the time, Poroshenko, who is widely known to be a U.S. CIA puppet. And he was discussing with Poroshenko how, because a prosecutor general was removed, a prosecutor general that was in fact investigating his son, and the president of Ukraine acknowledges, or the prime minister of Ukraine acknowledges there was no reason for this removal, but he wants the $1 billion. The first thing I thought when I heard this call was, well, hopefully somebody can run this through some software and figure out if it's a deep fake, because there is no doubt that between the candidates themselves and their campaigns and outside groups that are within the country, and in fact foreign groups that come from overseas, there will be a surplus of deep fake material that comes out this cycle when you talk about videos and audio recordings, and you won't be able to just believe what you hear and believe what you see. That will be the evolution of the 2020 election that will make it different from any other, and it will only get more extreme from there.
Yeah, I definitely agree. Like, the way I think about the track of history so far, or recent history, is that, after the Cold War, politics shifted to a much more culture war model rather than a material economic one. It was no longer like two economic systems trying to win. It's now like it's all culture war stuff, and I think that a lot of the abundance of information we're exposed to really contributes to that, because we're inundated with so much information that all of us are individually kind of piecing together different pieces of information, and that is what leads to a culture war. It's like a distraction from economic issues, because we're all crafting our own narratives out of essentially infinite information. How do you feel about that?
I think you're dead on. I think you're dead on with that point. And the degree to which culture wars have always been rough. I mean, you're talking about culture wars. Bill O'Reilly on Fox News used to blame particular musicians for school shootings. I mean, Bill O'Reilly basically blamed Marilyn Manson for the Columbine school massacre.
Yeah.
So culture wars have always been nasty, make no mistake. But they've gotten even more nasty. And now it's a situation where, if you don't subscribe to the idea of gay marriage, are you allowed to work at a Fortune 50 company? I don't know. Are you allowed to be the CEO of that company? I mean, these are real questions. People will come on both sides. But this is a new world where, in fact, are you allowed to be a post office driver anymore if you are into traditional Christian ideals? It's a tough question, and it's tough. And there are, of course, things that go the other direction. So it's a world in which the culture wars now for people are much more real and much less trivial, I think, than they were in the past, because it could make the difference between having a livelihood and not.
Yeah, they've basically supplanted, whereas the center left in the 60s or 70s would still be interested in economic issues the same way the far left is. The center left is still, or liberals, I guess, are becoming completely sucked into a culture war dynamic. I mean, a perfect example is when Trump was elected, there were a ton of protests. There was, you remember, like, protests taking over airports and stuff like that. And then as soon as stuff like Russiagate, the Ukraine stuff, the impeachment, that really, like, diffused any sort of, like, conventional left-wing activism and replaced it with this sort of, like, culture war bureaucracy. I don't know what you think about that.
I do, and I think even a more recent example of this was in all of these bailout bills. I mean, the one thing you have to remember is that we had a $1.4 trillion main budget for the year. Now, that doesn't include the Farm Bill. That doesn't include separate defense authorization spending bills that would come out. But that's just the main budget. And the main budget itself accounted for $1.4 trillion in spending, more than every other country combined. Now, we have this great big bill, and coronavirus comes along, and they say, well, it turns out there was no pandemic money in a $1.4 trillion bill. We have a space force to fight non-existent other space forces from other countries and, in fact, aliens. But we don't have pandemic response in the bill. So then they said, well, we need another $8 billion. $8 billion quickly turned into a total of $5.2 trillion outside of the main budget. Now, there's been $5.2 trillion in spending, and it's happened in the course of just a few months. What took the federal government 18 months to do, between 18 months and 2 years to do in 2008, 2009, they've gotten done in 2 months this time around. And the bargain in Washington, D.C., and I've seen it from the trenches of Jack's lobbying firm, is there's been a bargain struck. And the bargain is Republicans will give out free money to the banks and the Fortune 50s, and Democrats will allow it to happen. Even Democrats like Bernie Sanders and AOC, 96-0 votes through the Senate. Elizabeth Warren, nowhere to be found. No filibuster, no nothing. They'll allow all of this spending and giveaways to banks and Fortune 50s to happen. And they're not going to get any of their spending items in terms of universal health care and all the rest. I mean, hell, you're going to spend $5.2 trillion. Why not give universal health care a try for a couple of years? I mean, why not just take it for a spin? Just test drive it and see how it works if you're going to spend that much money anyway. But they're not going to get any of those points. What they will get, and what they will bring back to their constituency, is a number of social justice items, social justice deliverables. How real they are and how deliverable they are is debatable. So it's a bargain between Republicans who want to give away to energy companies, Fortune 50s, defense contractors, $5 trillion, banks, of course, $5 trillion, and Democrats are just going to allow it to go through. The same companies donate to them anyway, but they'll get a few social justice items in return. That's the trade. That's what's happened.
Yeah, I agree. And tell me, so The reason I think conservatives are completely winning the culture war entirely is, politics are based on making concessions. There will always be like a dominant class who makes concessions to the lower class. And right now, at least maybe for like 10, 20 years, you may not agree, but I'd say even during Obama's presidency, most of those concessions were things that appeased the right wing. For example, I'd say even Obamacare, even though Republicans fought against it at the time, it was originally a Heritage Foundation idea, and it was
Yes.
a Mitt Romney, Mitt Romney pushed it, and so I think in basically every measure, the conservatives are winning because the only concessions Democrats are willing to offer are superficial ones, like you said, like social justice issues that have no like tangible impact on, say, the economy or something like that.
And most of these social justice issues, it's like the idea of buying carbon credits. When you talk about global warming, it's like, what the hell is a carbon credit anyway? Turns out most of it is just handing out money to, mysterious nonprofits that may or may not donate to them. I mean, that's really what the deliverables are. It's just when you talk like, what is a, social justice proposal? What's a carbon credit? It's just handing out money to nonprofits. I mean, that's all it is. And the nonprofit, nonprofit is a deceptive term because the people who run them are making $500,000 a year and flying around the country first class. Now you mentioned that Republicans are winning. I mean, Obamacare, of course. Obamacare was a concept introduced, by Democrats that said private insurance is so evil that we're going to force you to buy it. I mean, it's just unbelievable. Of course, it was a Heritage Foundation plan, a Romney plan, originally called Romney Care in Massachusetts when he was the governor. So I think that you're right. And I mean, you look at the Obama presidency, and it was a situation where there's been a lot of debate. Why isn't Warren Buffett, performing like he used to? Well, because he doesn't have first right of refusal on every deal. In 08, 09, and 010, in fact, and even into 11, it was a situation where anytime there was one of these bailouts or bail-ins or the government, screwing over bondholders and propping up stocks of car companies or whatever kind of klepto-capitalism was going on, Warren Buffett would be the first person to get a call on his flip phone to invest alongside it. And for his trouble, of course, he was given a Presidential Medal of Freedom by Obama. I mean, you imagine, Trump just inviting in some, billionaire oligarch and just giving him a Medal of Freedom for the hell of it. Maybe he's done that, but I don't remember it. And it's just, I mean, that would just draw so much criticism, but that's what Obama did. And I think you're right. I mean, Obama, in terms of deliverables, was, fairly Republican, but he moved the needle in Overton window ways and social ways in terms of the conversation far to the left.
Yeah, I feel like the main impact from Obama, looking back on it, is that a portion of his support base went further left when they realized he was just like blowing smoke up their ass, and then a portion of his support base actually went pretty far right wing, in the sense, maybe not far right wing, but they turned to the right in the sense that they were looking for concessions from the government, and they weren't getting it from the left wing, which they typically associated with getting economic concessions. So they turned to the right because they were giving kind of cultural and social concessions.
I think so. And, the one area, of course, where Democrats are winning, and I don't know that this will prove to be a quote unquote win for them in the long term. It may be a bad thing for them, but is in this speech policing. And I know people on the more far left of the party experience it too. And conservatives certainly experience it, which is the idea that if you don't say what we like, if you're too edgy, we'll just delete you from the internet. And certainly I've experienced it. People I know have experienced it to even greater degrees. And it is really, really unfortunate. It's not good. Even Joe Rogan, who's about as establishment and about as milquetoast as they come politically, it pretends that all he reads is the New York Times and the LA Times, and that he only watches liberal YouTube videos, when I know that's not true, just based on the things he says and quotes. even he has to move to Spotify and license his show and get off YouTube before he's deleted. It's just it's very, very destructive, I think.
Yeah, well, the $100 million helps too.
That helps too. That certainly helps. Certainly helps. But he saw the writing on the wall. I mean, he probably would have made give or take the same amount of money, but I think he had to leave YouTube and leave Apple Podcasts.
Yeah.
That's just the way it goes. They censor everything now.
Speaking of that, I wanted to touch on a couple news stories just to see what you think, and I'm interested on your perspective on this one, considering you have been banned from Twitter. So Twitter is slowly rolling out a new feature where people can limit who can reply to tweets, and they can set the tweet so that only people they follow can reply, or that only people tagged in the tweet can reply, or no one can reply. So as someone who has been banned from Twitter, what do you think about this change?
I actually don't mind that change because you did have situations on Twitter where, there are so many robots. There are so many, people named that guy 9090976789110 with no profile picture. And you get sometimes just stormed by bots, and I don't know who runs the bots or who's behind it. I have some ideas and I have some information, but that would happen, and maybe this will prevent that. Maybe this will remove the incentive to run these non-productive sort of just vandal bot networks. They just kind of vandalize the platform. So I actually don't mind that, and it'll be sort of self-regulating as to who uses it, I think.
Yeah, I mean, I think that the bot element is a good aspect to it. Like, you don't want bots, but at the same time, I do think it'll kind of limit what people even use Twitter for, because it'll become more like a broadcasting announcements rather than conversation. But I guess we'll see. I'm not really sure.
Yeah, we will see. We will see indeed. I miss Twitter. It'd be nice to have, but it is nice to not have to tweet. If I had a Twitter, I'd have to comment on 12 to 30 topics a day that maybe I'm not interested in commenting in, but you have to, otherwise you get shadow banned and you get sort of deranked by the algorithm and run out of town.
Yeah, I had that issue with, because I run a blog. I haven't written on it for a couple weeks, but the Twitter account for that, it had this weird hold put on it where whenever I tweeted links to the blog, it would not show up to people who don't follow me. You couldn't search my tweets. You couldn't see. There were a bunch of weird features.
No, I've seen it. I've seen real shadow banning. It is a real thing. I mean, I have a friend who has in fact got a verified account. He's got 25,000 followers, but he is shadow banned. I mean, he could be a case study in being shadow banned. There will be certain times where he will put out a tweet and more people will DM him with a comment about the tweet than will like the tweet. And you think, how is that possible? There'll be 0 likes and 25 people DM'd him about it. So clearly, and then people will report and say, I liked your tweet. I retweeted your tweet. It's just, they unretweeted. So this stuff does happen. And whether it's purposeful or whether it's something built into the algorithm, and it's an automated thing, I'm not entirely sure. I think it's probably a combination of both, but it does happen. And I remember, right before I was banned, I had 190,000 followers and I wasn't shadow banned. I was newly not shadow banned. Somehow I broke through it. And I mean, every tweet I put out would get 8,000, 10,000, 12,000 retweets. I mean, it's just big numbers. 200,000 impressions per tweet or more. So it's very questionable, but I try not to belabor myself thinking about that platform too much because, of course, I don't have a stake in it. And people sometimes DM me and say, Jacob, you could use a VPN and disguise the DNS. And, I'm like, I'm not interested. I'm interested in tweeting as me. I'm not interested in running an account as some pseudonymous person that may or may not get banned.
Do you have an account where you don't tweet, you just read tweets?
Yeah. I've got an account. I've got the app so that I can just scroll through. Yeah, I do. And I probably check that out every other day. I don't spend a lot of time on it.
Yeah, I have another news story that I wanted to highlight. So, remember last December when a Saudi aviation student shot and killed 3 people at the military base in Florida? I'm sure you've heard about how the FBI has confirmed that the shooter, Second Lieutenant Mohammed al-Shamrani, of the Saudi Air Force, had been in contact with members from al-Qaeda since 2015. And then I have a quote here. FBI Director Christopher Wray said, quote, "He wasn't just coordinating with them about planning and tactics. He was helping the organization make the most it could out of his murders," end quote. Do you have any thoughts about that, or in general, the kind of incestuous relationship between Saudi Arabia and the U.S. and the Saudis' kind of overwhelming ties to Islamist, Salafists, Wahhabists, whatever you want to call it, groups like that?
Well, the first thing that I find fascinating about that story is, if you remember at the time, there were all of these accomplices that were involved, and then they went missing, and it was the missing Saudi airmen, and nobody's ever followed up on what happened. What happened to the missing Saudi airmen? Were they whisked out of the country on a private jet? Did the FBI say nothing more about that because Saudi Arabia buys $116 billion of fighter jets every year that they don't even know how to fly or use? Maybe. But the mainstream media, who's also greatly subsidized by Saudi Arabia, doesn't even bother to ask the question. They go to a press conference with Bill Barr, and they don't say, "Hey, Bill, what happened to those missing Saudi airmen?" When the Boston bombing happened, SWAT teams went through and went door to door and hunted the guys down when they went missing, quote unquote. But these guys who participated in a terror attack on a U.S. airbase, they went missing, and we just haven't heard anything new in 5 months. What the hell? What's going on? So nobody even asked the question. That's the first thing I wonder about that story. The other thing that I get so sick of is this fake debate that every time there's one of these public terror attacks, the FBI puts out this, and the DOJ puts out this nonsensical propaganda about how Apple's keeping us from getting into the phones. They need to get rid of encryption. When we all know exactly how it works. There's an Israeli company called Cellebrite. Cellebrite sells devices to law enforcement agencies, including the FBI, but even little local agencies. They cost about $160,000 a piece. They're not cheap. These devices, using code that is stolen on each successive update of iOS, you plug it into the iPhone, just like you charge it, and it opens it right up. Everyone knows the FBI has this technology, and they fail to say, wait a second, why are we having this fake debate about how Apple won't remove encryption when we all know that you can zip right into the phones? And not only can you, but the Chattanooga Police Department can. So it's this fake, really exhausting propaganda debate that plays out every time. And I don't know why Apple doesn't come out. The reason I can tell you why. The reason Apple doesn't come out and throw water on this is because they're embarrassed that every time they come out with iOS, there's some company in Tel Aviv that can just break right in. I mean, your phone is secure against, the burglar that takes it out of your car, but it is not secure against the FBI. They zip right in. So that's the other thing that annoys me about all this is this fake, this fake debate, and it happens every time. We're just so used to it now, but it does get exhausting. And now, the deal with al-Qaeda and Saudi Arabia is that Saudi Arabia has this bizarro feudalistic system where you have all of these power centers within this enormous royal family, and it really is unconscionably large because many of these people have, like King Salman, up to 50 kids. I mean, they have a lot of kids. And within these different sects of the family, different cliques, I think is maybe a better word, you have pockets of people that support Islamo-fascist terrorists, whether it be Al-Qaeda or ISIS or other groups, AQAP, you name it. And they don't just support them because they have lots and lots of money. So it's not like the doctor in London that sends them $100,000 and that's considered a big take. No, they send them $1 million, $10 million on a pallet. And, It is very disturbing, but I'm confident that Mohammed bin Salman's strongman approach of rounding these people up and disappearing them is probably, from a utilitarian standpoint, the best way to deal with it.
Yeah, it's the way I kind of think about it is that like the House of Saud is actually pretty secularized in the sense that they're not actually radical Islamists, but at the same time they know that their support is predicated on appeasing the most like right wing or fascistic authoritarian Islamists in their country, so they constantly play to them in order to retain power. That's how I kind of think about it.
I think that that's true. I think most people who, there are people that spend their lives researching this stuff, and I've read some books by them, and that's basically what you hear. I mean, that's what you hear, is that you have these madrasas and you have these clerics and you have members of the family even, and they both support these people. But then you also have, the rogue prince who's sending $10 million really to a terrorist training camp in many cases. So you do have both. You have the little payments and the appeasement to the ideology that takes place. But I think there is also material support that comes out, and they try to stop that wherever they can.
Yeah, it's like, I think the House of Saud actually came to power, if I remember right, maybe by making a deal with Wahhab to, essentially Wahhab would be in control of the ideological apparatuses of the state, and that contributes to the highly Islamist nature of Saudi Arabia, in exchange for the Sauds having control of all the money and all of that stuff, and that dynamic still exists today.
I think so. I think that's very accurate. That's what you hear, and that's what the best reporting shows on the topic. But what do you do? I mean, it's a very, very tough thing, and it's in a region where, broadly speaking, with few exceptions, you're dealing with a world of bad guys and worse guys. And it's very tough.
Yeah, and so I think that should be pretty good. Before we wrap up, I have one last question I'm just curious about, and then we can wrap up. So I'm about 6 years older than you, I think. I'm 28. I was in 4th grade when 9/11 happened, and it didn't really impact me much. Like, I knew it was a big deal and people were upset, but at the same time, it just didn't have the same impact. So, since you're someone younger than me and also of a completely different political orientation, what are your thoughts on 9/11?
Well, I was just about 4, just before my 4th birthday, when I watched it, and watched Wolf Blitzer cover it, as I recall, for whatever reason. And so my generation, as it were, as represented by, I guess, a grade level, would be the last one that remembers it, or even has a chance of remembering it. And I certainly do. But what is clear to me about 9/11 is that there is no measure really that is too extreme to deal with terrorism, but there is also now an implicit understanding that the FBI, the NSA, these various agencies in the United States are just going to spy on everyone. And whether this is effective or not, nobody can really tell. Whether it's ever stopped a terrorist attack or not, it's highly doubtful. But you have all of these controversies that the country constantly goes through, like Obamagate, Spygate, whatever you want to call it. And yet every year when the 702 authorization bill comes through, or the Patriot Act renewal comes through, it'll be buried inside a funding bill that is a must-sign bill, and the president signs off on it, whether it's Obama or Trump, who they use these very measures against. They sign off on it, and it's very, very unfortunate. It's very unfortunate. So there's been a lasting impact, and it's changed the course of this entire century. That's what's clear to me.
Yeah, I think 9/11 has to be continually mythologize, and they need to replicate that process in order to preserve the Patriot Act, like you said, and all of that kind of stuff. It's the ideological justification to continue piling on these kind of violations of constitutional rights.
I think you're correct. There's really, in most cases, no Fourth Amendment any longer. In very few cases is there any Fourth Amendment.
Yeah, I agree. So it's been great talking to you. Is there anything you want to plug before I go?
Well, of course, people can check out my show at censored.tv/Wohl. That's Man Up with Jacob Wohl is the name of the show if they're interested. And of course, they can follow me on Instagram at Jacob A. Wohl, and my website's jacobwohl.org. It's been just wonderful to be here, Christian, and keep up the great work.
Yeah, thank you for coming on the Society Show, and have a great rest of your day.
You too. Thanks.
Bye.